For what I think is like the fifth time, a yearly annual tradition, we talk the Sabres being eliminated from playoff contention.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. An annual tradition. Every year that we've done this show, I think it's been 5 years, right? We started the show in October of 2019, but our first season together, we had a shutdown. So I guess there was a day where we learned the details of the restart and realized the Sabres were 1 point from being a part of the NHL's qualifying round that was kind of the playoffs, but not really the playoffs. So I guess that day would count for this as well. 21, 22, 23, and now 24. Another year where the Sabres will not go to the playoffs. Sneaky Joe DiBiase here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We'll get to all of it. An incredible comment that was made by Tage Thompson in postgame after the Sabres lost to the Dallas Stars. And if my opinion has changed at all on the job status of Don Granato, spoiler alert, it has a little bit. So we'll get to that coming up. It's going to be a drought-heavy day. It is another year of this nonsense where we have to figure out, okay, what is wrong with this hockey team? Are they on their way to something? Are we being impatient as a fan base because it's been so long? We're questioning the mental toughness again of this hockey team, and the players are pretty pissed off at themselves and maybe also at other people. We'll get to a lot of that coming up, that type of nonsense. Your droughtology of the day. I mean, I could fire off lasers everywhere on droughtology for today. I had earlier today, I retweeted my favorite droughtology that I've ever had, which is that the last Sabre playoff game was on Versus, the TV channel Versus, which is, I think it maybe stopped existing immediately after the Sabres missed. That's how it's been forever. Versus was the last time that they were in the playoffs. That's one. The droughtology of the day that I at least got the most likes on Twitter for this one, so I'll assume this is the best one of the day. The number of times missing the playoffs. Buffalo Sabres since 2011. 13. Of course, they're on a 13-year playoff drought. The Boston Bruins, since the original 6 ended in 1967, 7. The Sabres have missed the playoffs almost twice as much in the last 13 years as the Bruins have in basically all of their existence, which goes back to 67 at least, because that's when real playoffs as a format began. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way, Matt Beauvais, our buddy from Channel 7, tweeted out that the Sabres have missed the playoffs 13 times since 2011. Between 1970 and 2010, they only missed the playoffs 11 times. The Sabres missed the playoffs fewer times in the first 40 years of existence as they have in the last 13 years. It's just incredible that we've reached this point. They are in a tie now with the New York Jets for the longest active playoff drought in professional sports. And we will not become a Jet show today, deciding whether they'll make it. But if you are a football fan, you know they've made some moves this offseason, and Aaron Rodgers might be back healthy. He'll be back. We just don't know how healthy he'll be. So the Jets have a pretty good look at ending their 13-year playoff drought. So it's very possible that by next winter, the Sabres will be sitting by themselves alone atop North American sports for the longest playoff drought in North American sports. It's never been this long in the NHL. They have the record. They have the record by more than a couple of years now. It's up to a 3-year gap that they have over everybody else in all of NHL history for how long it's been not making the postseason. And I do empathize to a degree, not many degrees, a degree, with the players, the organization, the coach, the GM, of you are carrying the weight of not just your own failures, but of your predecessors' failures too. But that's part of the job here. You know, if Don Granato gets fired, and we'll talk about that later too, whoever comes in and replaces him, I don't know if they'll act this way, but that replacement will be carrying the weight of all of his predecessors' failures, all of those missed playoff seasons, a 13-year drought. Because the effects of a 13-year drought are that you have a fan base that every time you go on a 3-game losing streak or you have a really bad period, you're going to hear it. You're going to hear it from the fans because the fans have earned that. They've earned that through the longest period in hockey history like this, not making the postseason. So it's part of the job. It's part of the deal. I know maybe that kind of contributes to why a lot of guys don't want to come here because they know how upset and negative a situation that it is. But again, it's earned. The organization has earned that over time here. So I don't know what they'll do at coach. We'll get to that in a little bit, but it's just crazy. It's unbelievable that we've got another year here, especially when this was probably the year that fans felt better about their chances than any year during this drought, except for 2 other seasons. I think if you go back to the 2015-16 season, despite the fact that Jack Eichel and Sam Reinhart were rookies that year, there was a level of expectation with that hockey team. They had just added established good players like Ryan O'Reilly and Evander Kane. Now, a lot of the rest of it was youth and unproven, even beyond Eichel and Reinhart. They traded a first-round pick for a goaltender in Robin Lehner. So that was a little bit of, well, we'll see here. Good goalie prospect. Doesn't mean it'll translate. I don't know. But they made a move there. So they started to build things back up in 15-16. And that was a year where we all thought that they could take hold of it and go. The National, did not think that. Their over-under point total that season, 15-16, was 75 points. So in that way, it's not that similar. But there was local expectation, I would say, from that first year after the tank. For comparison, by the way, that team had a 75.5 point over-under. This team this year, remember, was in the mid to high 80s. Actually, maybe creeped into the low 90s. The other year, and this almost doesn't even count, there's a year in the drought where the Sabres had a 98.5 over-under. 98.5. That was the 2011-12 season. Again, almost doesn't even count. Is it even part of the drought? They hadn't missed yet when that season began. They were on the heels of a playoff berth, a new owner, an influx of money, and they added Ville Leino, who had been a good player in Philadelphia. They added Christian Ehrhoff, who, if you didn't like the contract, you still knew he was a good player, a very good player in Vancouver. They had Brad Boyce coming back that year. They had, after only having a couple of games with the team, a couple of coffee. So that hockey team had expectations a lot. But again, it's almost not even really the drought. This year is unique. This was the truest year of expectations that they've ever had, because it was expected by not just us, but also by, the bookies at least, and I know the national media is somewhat representative of that too, that teams were expecting this Sabres team to, if not make the playoffs, at least push right to the very end for a playoff spot. And did it ever feel like at any point in this year like they were going to make it? Did you ever feel confident that they were going to make it? And they never won more than 3 games in a row. So simply put, when would you have decided that they were going to get in? When would you have thought that they were going to? I just don't have an answer on that front. It's incredible. 13 years, and we trudge on, and hopefully it doesn't get to 14 years. but I don't know how hopeful we're going to be at the start of next season. When we come back, Tage Thompson made a weird comment about outside noise affecting this hockey team. It's an unbelievable conversation that I can't believe we have to have, but we have to have it. Coming back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, we are presented here on the show by FanDuel Sportsbook. It is coming up on playoff time. The Sabres might not be headed there, but the Stanley Cup playoffs are awesome. The intensity ramps up, and you've got a lot of drama. It's, of course, overtime stuff that we always get excited about in playoff hockey. So check out FanDuel Sportsbook because it's playoff time and baseball's in full swing. And FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. $150 whether you win or lose. You can bet on everything. Slam dunks, home runs, what else? Slap shots, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet an automatic win. This is FanDuel, an official partner of the National Football League. All right, back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. This makes us your first listen every day. Be sure, after you're done with us, to check out Locked On Sports today. If you're sick of all the yelling, ESPN, Fox Sports, make the switch to Locked On Sports today. Free 24/7 streaming channel. It's available on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sabres are officially eliminated from postseason contention with a 3-2 loss to the Dallas Stars. Couple of deflected goals by Dallas. Could have been a third deflected goal, but it got overturned by review. Dallas is a great hockey team. They are going to push for the Stanley Cup. They are in first place in the Western Conference for a reason, above Colorado, above the season Vancouver's had, 109 points. In fact, they're only 1 point behind the Rangers for the President's Trophy. So that was a tough team on the road. So the individual game, though, last night, is not the problem we have. It is not the subject matter of why fans are upset. It's the season in totality. After the hockey game last night, Tage Thompson meets with the media. After Don Granato said, by the way, he was asked by Paul Hamilton about the playoff drought being extended, and Granato didn't want to talk about it. Now, he did with me and Jeremy on Tuesday morning at WGR, so you can find that. But he didn't want to get into it last night. Who did want to get into it last night was Tage Thompson. Tage Thompson was asked about takeaways for this season. And he said the biggest takeaway for him was that outside noise may have got to them in the season and that they've got to block that out. Outside noise may have got to them, may have got in their heads. That's what Tage Thompson said last night. I don't want to go too far with it, or maybe I do. It's unbelievable that we have to ask this question, but it is warranted, of whether this team is mentally soft. Are you kidding me? Outside noise. This is not Toronto. This is not Philadelphia. This is not Boston. This is a big hockey market in terms of the percentage of hockey fans. But it's also not a very lively one. There's not a lot of investment right now in this hockey team. It's about as lifeless as the area has ever been about this hockey team. So it could get a lot worse, no doubt. Thompson about outside noise. I just wonder, what does he even mean specifically by that? Is he talking about social media? Is he talking about podcasts, radio, and television? Or is he just talking about the crowd? And that's what I wonder. I wonder if he just is thinking about the fan atmosphere at KeyBank Center, which, sure, it's negative. But as I spoke about earlier, it's completely within the right of fans that building is negative right now. When they are not playing well, by the way, when they're not playing well. You know what my mind goes right back to? Again, I cannot believe we are still asking this question. I more than ever today, after hearing Thompson talk about that and all the little hints that have been dropped along the way about a fateful night in December against the Columbus Blue Jackets, where the Sabres lost 9-3. Are we still talking about that game? Is it possible? And I don't know. I'm legitimately asking. I'm not saying that flippantly. I'm legitimately asking, are we still talking about that night against the Blue Jackets? The night that I've pointed out is the only night all year that I heard fans chanting to fire Don Granato when you let in 9 goals to the worst team in the Eastern Conference. That night, and I was in the arena. It wasn't the whole crowd. It wasn't half the crowd. It wasn't a quarter of the crowd. It might have been 100 people. It might have been 200 people. It wasn't everybody. It was one section, maybe, that was chanting to fire Granato. And it lasted for like 10 seconds, 20 seconds, maybe. It was not the whole night, the whole ringing through the arena. I can't believe I have to ask myself, how much did that night affect them? Because when Thompson says that outside noise may have got to them, there are signs that say that night got to them. Again, these are all dots connected to a bigger story here. You don't have to subscribe to the players not saluting the fans once that was caught is a big deal. But it's one of a bunch of signs, including players talking about it. Dahlin, when he talked about being upset by the chant the next game when they beat Toronto in December. You heard Tuck talk about this in passing. He didn't say anything critical. He talked about that night or chants in the crowd, I should say, from earlier in the season, which that's the only game he could be talking about to my knowledge. That's it. He talked about that in Elliot Friedman's podcast. There are other players that have referenced it along the way. The salute thing. Now I got Thompson saying the outside noise may have got to them this season. Is it possible that game and a couple hundred Sabre fans chanting derailed their season? It would be pretty unbelievable if that's true. But I'm seriously wondering if that is what happened. That night where they lost and got smoked by Columbus and gave up 9 goals got to them to a degree that it nuked their season. And guess what? Yeah, they're young. Yeah, they're inexperienced. Other teams overcome that. This team doesn't. This team didn't. And leadership, Kyle Pozo and Zemgus Girgensons, who have kept on this hockey team for years and years to be guiding voices behind the scenes, to be the true pros that show the kids how the job is done, how to overcome any adversity. Those two were in the building. Those two were in that room all those months of the season. That Thompson is saying, yeah, outside noise may have got to us. Where was the captain? Where was the assistant captain? Where were these guys? And it makes me think about Tim Connolly. I don't say that just out of nowhere. Tim Connolly was just on Spittin' Chicklets with Paul Bissonnette, Ryan Whitney. And Connolly told the story of when Chris Drury got to Buffalo and how Connolly saw the way he did things, saw the way he conducted himself, how he would go to the building way before he needed to get treatment. He would take a taxi to the arena long before he needed to be there to get treatment done. And Connolly talked about how he started following Drury around like a lost puppy. Like, this guy, I mean, he's won a cup in Colorado. This guy knows how to win. This guy, look what he's doing with his habits, and look how he's working. Look the way he does things. I'm going to follow him around. And that's what Tim Connolly did. He followed Drury around and gave Drury a lot of credit that dude walked into that building and changed the culture of the team. I'm not a big culture guy, but when I heard Connolly talk about that, I'm like, all right. But you know what else Connolly said? And this is important. If you want to talk the culture point, the leadership point, the current state of this team, the inexperience, the maturity. What Connolly said about Drury, he talked about the combination of leading in the locker room and in the facilities, and then leading by example on the ice. He gave Drury a lot of credit for that. The dude was good. He led by example on the ice. You tell me when the last time the Sabres had a captain or a strong leader in that building that also led by example on the ice. Who was the last strong presence both on the ice and off the ice? Because I got examples of both. Okposo seemingly, and maybe Brian Giunta could have been this. Maybe Craig Rivet. Strong leaders off the ice, none of which carried their own weight on the ice. None of them were important players none of them were top line guys. None of them were second line guys. None of them were, Poso maybe for a couple of minutes was, but not when he was captain. None of those guys were big minute eaters. None of those guys were their best players on the ice. And then Eichel, who was the best player, and you could say led by example on the ice, was not seen as a strong presence in the locker room, was not seen as a strong leader. And his age maybe plays into that. Maybe they gave him the C too early. With whatever. They've not had a guy that gives you both to set the tone for the franchise, for the organization, for the locker room, and then backed it up on the ice. The last guy they had that did that was Chris Drury and Danny Briere. That's the last time that's happened. And that's what they need. Where do you get that, though? Where do you get that? I mean, cross your fingers and hope Rasmus Dahlin turns into that. Alex Tuch, I mean, your internal guys are who you're looking at. Or if we want to get crazy, and, this offseason we'll have a lot of time to talk about a lot of different ideas. I know I'm going to talk about Steven Stamkos. As much as a fairy tale dream as it probably is, I tweeted this out this morning, and I'm not even really kidding. Go make Steven Stamkos the highest paid player in the NHL. I don't know what else to do at this point. That dude is still great, scoring 40 goals this year, over a point a game player, and he's still young enough, 33, and that dude knows what it takes. That dude would step right in and take over that locker room and establish a culture and also back it up on the ice. I don't know what else you do. And honestly, even as I say that, you can offer Steven Stamkos the most money in the league. He still might not come here. That's the state of the franchise right now. Joe Pavelski, who we just saw play the Sabres last night, is 39 years old and still super productive. Maybe he's an idea because you could get him cheaper and you could get him maybe on a shorter term deal. Maybe the same thing, though. Maybe Pavelski's like, I'm not going to Buffalo to end my career. What are you, crazy? I'm trying to win one last Stanley Cup. I don't know that they're going to land on an out-of-town guy that does that. They need a Drury trade. Whether that's they traded for Drury and everything changed on that front. At least that's what Connolly says. Brady Tkachuk, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think your best hope is cross your fingers and hope that Rasmus Dahlin is going to be that guy. Maybe Alex Tuch feels that he has a stronger voice after Okposo's gone. But I've been on this little tirade against Okposo, by the way. Here we are again with another team that is, we're scratching our heads going, wait, the outside noise got to you? What are you talking about? And you've had questions about mental fragility on this hockey team going all the way back to that 2015-16 season, or actually maybe the year after that. O'Reilly, even as far back, right? And Eichel and Reinhart. And, there's always been questions about the mental fortitude of these teams. And Kyle Okposo was a leader on every single one of these teams. So I don't need to blast the guy too much, but it's crazy to me that he ever got a lot of credit for that when you never saw the effect on anybody else. You never saw the effect on the rest of the team. His strong leadership and what it did. They had to have that guy year after, at least this year when they brought him back. They couldn't get rid of him before this year. Maybe that was because of money, but I think they need someone to take over and give you a lot of the stuff that Chris Drury once did. When we come back, what about Don Granato's job security? I'll tell you where my meter is shifting to on Granato and what's going to happen with him in about a week, as the final game is next Monday in Tampa. That's coming back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented here on the show by Sleeper. We are almost done, and the standings stink, and they're not going to make it. But you could still win big. Check out Daily Fantasy Hockey on Sleeper. It's the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Check out players from around the league: McDavid, Ovechkin, Crosby, McKinnon. McKinnon's riding shotgun, or I should say driving the car, with Jonathan Drouin again, like back in their junior days. Drouin's interesting for this. Record and check out whether any of these guys will record more or less than their Sleeper projections lines for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, or more in a given game. To win 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. It's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms and for details and locational availability. Final segment here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Be sure to check out our Locked On Sabres text line, and you can chime in. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. What do I have recently on the text line that's interesting? One texter at 8 a.m. this morning. Get, all caps, get Granato out of that locker room. I'm ready to consider that the team needs to not look the same next year, and they need to make some risky moves. I'm okay with it. Players who need to be traded: Krebs, Jokiharju, Girgensons, Greenway. Greenway is not a top-line foreigner. He needs to stay on the fourth. All right, a little bit of a rant there. Get Granato out of that locker room. Are they going to get Granato out of that locker room? I'm not thinking it's impossible. In fact, I told you a couple weeks ago, I don't think it's all that likely. I would bet against it. I probably still would bet against it. I'm definitely considering it more than I have before. Only thing I just want to point to this as I wear my Bills hoodie today, if you're watching on YouTube. The only thing I can't figure out is because I haven't heard anything on this front, like definitive. Is my mind thinking Granato is more likely to stay than I thought 2 weeks ago? Is that because of how the season's unfolding here? Or is that because the Bills traded Stephon Diggs? Because I, like many, thought it was impossible to trade Stephon Diggs off the Buffalo Bills. The cap stuff and the nonsense of all the drama always seeming like it wasn't real. Whatever. Then they traded him. So I was walking around thinking that's impossible. They'll never do it, fully expecting he'll be on the team. And then the Bills did it. So now everything seems possible, right? And I would have thought Granato getting fired was more likely than Diggs getting traded, and Diggs got traded. So it's like, well, I guess I have to think Granato getting fired is more likely than before, even if maybe nothing's actually changed. I will say this. The season's ending exactly how we would have predicted. 2 weeks ago, the season's ending how we would have predicted. So, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out in my own head why I think it's more likely Granato would get fired. I think it just kind of comes down to how can he not? How can he not? I like the guy. I like his style. I don't know that he even fully has been able to play the style of hockey that he wants to all season long. I don't know. Was he 100% on the hook for the decision to go more defensive, more conservative? I don't know. But he doesn't talk like he used to. We had him on Tuesday, and he was talking about how you can't try all out to score the first goal. I mean, Don Granato 3 years ago would have never said something like that. He would have been like, we got to score as many goals as possible. We're going to play entertaining hockey. The players like playing that style. It's how we're suited to play. I don't know what I'm supposed to make of this year when the style and how the team plays is just so confusing. Do they want to be offensive? Do they want to be more of a lockdown team? We've never really been able to figure that out. I don't know if Granato's ever been able to figure that out. So the confusion that has taken place this year, and I don't know, Terry Pegula, in the past, he's been fine paying guys before extensions kick in or with a lot of extension left. So should I assume he wouldn't pay Don Granato 2 years to not coach for him? I wouldn't assume that. I don't know what they would do instead. Chad DiDomenicis expected Buffalo writing about Seth Appert today as an idea. I just can't imagine an idea that gets fans less excited for next season than if Seth Appert is their freaking head coach. So I don't know what they're going to do. My chips would probably still lie towards they're going to get rid of Granato. They're not going to get rid of Granato, I should say. I might only feel like 60-40 on that front, though. I think there is a chance. There's a very good chance that this is it. And if they do, I think Lindy Ruff should be the favorite. I think Lindy Ruff probably is the favorite. Appert would be an option as well. I don't think in these last 3 games don't matter. I mean, God, I hope they don't matter. If 3 games after you've been eliminated matter, you've got bigger problems than who your head coach is. So we'll see what we get these final couple of games. How Granato sounds. I was looking for signs when he talked this morning and last night. If he was giving any hints to, like in the offseason, we'll have to do this, or next year we'll have to do this. Because that would imply he thinks he's sticking around. I didn't hear that. It doesn't have to mean anything. I just didn't hear that type of terminology from him that would have him talking like he's going to be back. Doesn't have to matter if he did talk like that, just saying that I didn't hear that from Don Granato. That's going to do it for us today here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. Come back tomorrow. Sabres and Capitals. Ovechkin's chase continues for Gretzky's record. Sabres left out play spoiler. What are we going to do tomorrow? Well, prospect stuff. We're going to slowly become Locked On Amherst coming up. So we'll do a little bit of a check-in down on the farm. See if I get a guest, talk Rochester a little bit, and we'll sludge on 13 years without a playoff berth. Sabres Droughtology. If you got a good Sabres Droughtology, be sure to text or tweet it in. Let me know. We'll read it on the show. Thanks for listening here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We'll talk to you tomorrow, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.